December 8th, 2019, Buckley Air Force Base, Colorado. Temperature, 14 degrees Fahrenheit. At 4:30 a.m., while most of the base was asleep, the call came in. A group of 3 experienced mountaineers had gone missing in the high peaks of the Rocky Mountains, about 70 miles northwest of Denver. Their last known location was near a remote valley called Whitestone Ridge 2 days prior. No distress signal or emergency beacon. Everything was silent. Have you ever climbed those mountains in winter? The cold doesn't just freeze your skin, it freezes time. Every sound echoes sharply in the air. Every breath you take burns your lungs. When the wind stops, the silence is so absolute that you can hear the echoes of your own heartbeat. It was 5 a.m. when Captain Mark Harlow received his mission briefing. For 12 years, he had led rescue operations, rescued climbers from cliff edges, pulled hikers from avalanche zones, and even found people who didn't want to be found. But this mission was different. The briefing officer, a colonel whose name stayed off the record, handed Harlow a thin folder. Inside were topographic maps with red circles marking the search zone, weather reports showing incoming storms, and 3 photographs of the missing climbers. What caught Harlow's attention wasn't what was in the file. It was what wasn't. No timeline of their planned route, no contact history, no last known communication transcript, just coordinates and a deadline. "You have 72 hours, the colonel said. "Find them or find evidence. Weather window closes after that." Harlow nodded. He'd worked under tight timelines before, but the colonel's tone carried weight beyond urgency. It was finality. By 6:30, Harlow's team assembled in the equipment bay. Sergeant Lewis Carter checked the radio systems, testing frequencies and backup channels. Carter was the kind of operator who could pull signal from dead air, a comms specialist who'd served in places where communication meant survival. He had that focused look, the one soldiers get when they know the mission isn't routine. Lieutenant Eric Nolan studied the maps, tracing elevation lines with his finger. At 28, Nolan was the youngest on the team, but his navigation skills were flawless. He'd grown up in these mountains, knew their moods, their dangers. He looked up once and met Harlow's eyes. "Sir, these coordinates put them in restricted airspace. That valley's been off limits for civilian access since 2011. "I know," Harlow said. "We're cleared for entry." Corporal Diaz, the team medic, loaded medical supplies into the transport vehicle. She moved with practiced efficiency, checking inventory twice. Diaz had seen enough mountain accidents to know what injuries to expect: frostbite, hypothermia, falls, broken bones. But she also packed trauma kits, the kind used for combat wounds. When Harlow noticed, he didn't comment. She was thinking ahead. That was good. Lieutenant Kane arrived last, hauling drone equipment in reinforced cases. Kane was Air Force through and through, specialized in aerial reconnaissance. His drones could see through fog, map terrain in real time, and relay thermal signatures from 5 miles out. He set the cases down and looked at the mountain range visible through the bay doors. "Storm's coming in fast," he said. "We'll have maybe 6 hours of clear flight time before visibility drops to 0. The convoy rolled out at 7:30. 2 heavy trucks loaded with gear, all-terrain vehicles strapped to trailers, and enough supplies for a week in the field. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds that promised snow. The road climbed steadily, winding through pine forests that grew denser as the elevation increased. By the time they reached the staging area, the temperature had dropped to 6 degrees. The staging point was an abandoned ranger station, its windows boarded, roof sagging under old snow. Harlow ordered the team to set up a base camp while he reviewed the maps again. The missing climbers' last GPS ping came from a narrow valley 3 miles northeast, accessible only by foot or snowmobile. The terrain was brutal, steep rock faces on both sides, deep snow in the basin, and limited exit routes. Carter set up the communication array extending antennas toward the search zone. He ran through frequency checks, logging each channel. Everything came back clear except for one band, a low-frequency static that shouldn't have been there. He frowned, adjusted the filters, but the static remained. Faint, rhythmic, almost like breathing through a bad connection. "You getting that?" he asked Nolan, who was standing nearby. Nolan listened through his headset. "Yeah, probably interference from the peaks. Granite plays hell with signal bounce." Carter wanted to believe that, but he'd operated in mountain terrain before. This didn't sound like bounce. It sounded deliberate. At 1100 hours, the team moved out on snowmobiles. The machines cut through fresh powder, engines roaring in the silence. The forest closed in around them, tall pines blocking most of the daylight. The tracks they followed were 2 days old, barely visible under new snow. Michael Ross, Sarah Bennett, and Tom Fletcher had come this way, confident and prepared. Now, the only trace of them was fading beneath white drifts. The valley opened ahead, wide and white under gray skies. The wind had died completely. No birds called, no branches creaked, just the sound of their engines and the hiss of snow under the skis. Harlow raised his hand, signaling a halt. The team stopped, engines idling, and listened. Nothing. "Spread out," Harlow ordered. "Search pattern Alpha. Carter, keep comms open. Kane, get the drone up." Kane unpacked the drone, a sleek machine with thermal imaging and high-resolution cameras. It lifted smoothly, rotors humming, and climbed toward the ridgeline. The feed came through on Harlow's tablet, showing the valley floor in sharp detail. Trees, rocks, snowdrifts. No movement, no heat signatures. They moved deeper into the valley. The snow was waist-deep in places, forcing them to dismount and wade through on foot. Diaz spotted something first, a flash of color against the white. She called out, and the team converged on the spot. It was a tent, partially collapsed, canvas torn and flapping in the breeze that had just started to pick up. The entrance was open, snow piled inside. Harlow approached slowly, rifle ready. He knelt and looked inside. The interior was chaos. Sleeping bags ripped open, foam padding scattered, gear strewn everywhere. But no blood, no signs of struggle, just destruction, methodical and complete. Harlow's breath came out in white clouds as he backed away. "Someone tore this apart," Diaz said quietly. "Something," Nolan corrected, his voice tight. Carter was checking the perimeter, his radio crackling softly. "Captain, you need to see this." Harlow followed him 20 feet from the tent. There, pressed deep into the snow, were tracks. Not human, not animal either. Each print was massive, maybe 16 inches long, with 5 distinct impressions that could have been toes. The stride length was impossible, at least 8 feet between steps. The tracks led away from the campsite, heading deeper into the valley toward the rock face. Kane's drone feed showed more. The tracks continued for half a mile, always in a straight line, never deviating. They passed through areas where the snow was thin, leaving impressions in frozen ground that would have required tremendous weight. Near the base of the cliff, the tracks simply stopped. No return path, no indication of where whatever made them had gone. "What the hell are we looking at?" Kane said, his voice barely above a whisper. Harlow didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about the briefing, the missing information, the colonel's tone. This mission wasn't just about finding lost climbers. It was about confirming something the Air Force already suspected. "Carter, radio back to base," Harlow said. "Tell them we've located the campsite." "No survivors found. We're continuing the search." Carter moved back toward the snowmobiles, but his radio crackled before he could transmit. The static had returned, louder now, pulsing in rhythm. He adjusted the frequency, but every channel carried the same noise. Then, through the static, came a sound that made his blood run cold. A voice, faint, distorted, but unmistakably human. 3 syllables repeated twice. Then silence. "Did you hear that?" Carter asked. Harlow was already beside him, headset on. They waited. The static built again, rising in waves. Then the voice returned, clearer this time. "Help us." The transmission cut out. Carter tried to respond, keying the mic repeatedly, but nothing went through. The static faded to white noise, then disappeared entirely. The radio went dead. "Check the power," Harlow ordered. Carter pulled the battery pack. Full charge. He reconnected it, powered the system back up. Everything showed green, but when he tried to transmit, nothing happened. The radio was receiving, but not sending. That shouldn't have been possible. "We're cut off," Carter said. Nolan was staring at the tree line. "Captain, the wind's changing." Harlow felt it too. The temperature was dropping fast, the air growing heavy. Dark clouds rolled over the ridge, moving with unnatural speed. Within minutes, snow began to fall, thick and fast, erasing their tracks. "We need to move," Harlow said. "Follow those prints before we lose them." The team advanced in formation, weapons ready. The snowfall intensified, reducing visibility to 20 feet. The tracks ahead were filling in quickly, but still visible enough to follow. They led to the cliff face, a sheer wall of granite rising 300 feet into the storm. Kane brought the drone lower, scanning the rock. The thermal camera showed nothing but cold stone. But then, near the base, a darker patch appeared on the screen. An opening, maybe 10 feet wide, partially hidden by fallen rocks and ice. "There," Kane said, pointing. "Cave entrance." They approached carefully. The tracks led directly to the opening, then inside. The snow around the entrance was disturbed, trampled, like something had moved in and out repeatedly. Harlow clicked on his flashlight and stepped forward. The cave entrance was narrow, forcing them to move single file. The walls were rough, jagged, untouched by human tools. The temperature inside was somehow colder than outside, the air sharp and still. Their lights cut through darkness that felt solid, oppressive. 50 feet in, the passage opened into a wider chamber. The team spread out, lights sweeping the space. The walls were ice-covered, reflecting their beams in strange patterns. At the far end, they found gear, backpacks, climbing equipment, a satellite phone crushed into pieces. Diaz knelt beside one of the packs. "This is Sarah Bennett's," she said, reading the name tag. "But where is she?" A sound echoed from deeper in the cave. Not wind, not falling ice. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, moving toward them. Harlow raised his rifle. Lights on that tunnel. Now. 5 beams converged on the darkness ahead. For a moment, nothing. Then, at the edge of their light, something moved. Tall, massive, hunched forward. The shadows made it impossible to see clearly, but the shape was wrong. Too large. Too angular. The footsteps stopped. In the silence that followed, they heard breathing. Deep, slow, echoing through the cave like wind through a tunnel. Then, impossibly, the lights went out. All of them. 5 flashlights, all dead at once. In the absolute darkness, the breathing grew louder. Closer, Harlow's voice cut through the black. "Fall back." Everyone out. Now. They stumbled toward the entrance, hands on the walls, moving by feel. Behind them, the footsteps resumed, not running, walking, following at a steady pace that somehow kept closing the distance no matter how fast they moved. Carter's light flickered back on, then the others. They were 10 feet from the entrance. The daylight beyond looked gray and dim, but it was there. They burst out into the storm, gasping, and turned back toward the cave. Nothing followed them out. But there, in the fresh snow just outside the entrance, were new tracks. The same massive prints, leading away from the cave, circling their position, then heading back up the ridge into the trees. Whatever was in that valley with them wasn't hiding anymore. It was hunting. The team retreated to the ranger station as the storm strengthened. By 1600 hours, Visibility had dropped to less than 50 feet. The wind howled through the trees, carrying snow in horizontal sheets that stung exposed skin like needles. Inside the station, they set up portable heaters and tried to make sense of what they'd found. Harlow spread the maps across a makeshift table, marking the cave location with red ink. The tracks they'd followed formed a pattern that made no sense. Whatever created them had circled the campsite multiple times before moving toward the cliff face. Not the behavior of an animal searching for food. This was deliberate, calculated. "We need to talk about what we saw in that cave," Nolan said, his voice quiet but firm. "We didn't see anything," Harlow replied. "Our lights failed. Darkness plays tricks." "All 5 lights don't fail simultaneously," Carter said. He was working on the radio equipment, trying to restore transmission capability. "And tricks don't leave tracks that big." Diaz sat near one of the heaters, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold. "Those packs we found were torn apart the same way as the tent. Whatever did that has strength beyond anything natural. And the phone wasn't just broken, it was crushed." The casing was compressed into the circuitry. Kane was reviewing drone footage on his laptop, frame by frame. "I've been going through the thermal scans. Watch this." He turned the screen so the others could see. The footage showed their approach to the cave, the heat signatures of the 5 team members clear and bright. But there, in the background, was another signature, faint, diffuse, as if the heat was spread across a larger area than it should be. "That's not environmental. That's biological. Something was in that cave with us." Harlow studied the image. The shape was humanoid but wrong. The proportions distorted. Too tall, limbs too long. The heat signature flickered at the edges, almost as if whatever it was had been standing just beyond the range of clear detection. "Could be equipment malfunction," Harlow said, but even he didn't sound convinced. "Could be," Kane agreed. "But I've run diagnostics 3 times. The drone's working perfectly. Whatever this is, it was there." Outside, the wind shifted direction, slamming against the station's walls. A shutter tore loose and banged repeatedly against the siding. Carter stood and checked the perimeter monitors they'd set up, small motion sensors placed around the building, designed to alert them if anything approached. All showed clear. "We should try to get some rest," Harlow said. 2-hour rotations on watch. Carter, you're first. Wake Nolan at 2000 hours. Nobody slept well. The storm created a constant background noise that made it impossible to relax. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind sounded like something moving outside. Diaz lay in her sleeping bag, eyes open, listening. Once, she thought she heard footsteps on the roof. Heavy, deliberate steps that moved from one end to the other, then stopped. She waited for them to resume, but they didn't. At 1930 hours, Carter's radio sparked to life. The static returned, pulsing in that same rhythmic pattern. He adjusted the frequency, trying to clear it, but the noise only grew louder. Then, cutting through the interference, came that voice again, distorted, barely human. "Don't follow." Carter grabbed the mic. "Say again. Identify yourself." The static swelled, then dropped to almost nothing. In the brief clarity, the voice returned, clearer than before. "Don't follow the tracks." "Who is this?" Carter demanded. "Michael Ross? Sarah Bennett? Tom Fletcher?" No response. The static built again, higher and sharper, until it became painful to listen to. Carter pulled the headset off, but even with it resting on the table, he could hear the noise. It wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. It was coming from outside. He moved to the window and looked out into the storm. The motion sensors were all still clear, but something felt wrong. The snow was falling straight down now, no wind, just heavy flakes dropping in absolute silence. Through the white curtain, he saw movement, a shape, tall and dark, standing at the tree line maybe 40 yards away. Carter's hand went to his sidearm. He keyed the radio. "Captain, we've got movement outside, northeast tree line." Harlow was awake instantly, moving to the window. He saw it too. The figure stood motionless in the snow, barely visible through the storm. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall, with long arms that hung nearly to its knees. The proportions were wrong, inhuman. As they watched, it turned its head toward the station. Even through the distance and darkness, they felt its gaze. "Everyone up," Harlow said quietly. "Gear on. Now." The team assembled in less than 2 minutes, weapons ready, thermal scopes activated. Nolan scanned the tree line through his scope. The figure showed no heat signature. It was there, solid and real, but registering the same temperature as the surrounding snow. "That's not possible," Nolan whispered. "Kane, get the drone up," Harlow ordered. "Storm's too heavy," Kane said. "Wind'll tear it apart." "I don't care. I need to know what that is." Kane launched the smallest drone, a reconnaissance model built for bad weather. It lifted shakily, fighting the wind, and climbed toward the tree line. The feed showed on Kane's tablet, the camera struggling to focus through the snow. When it finally locked into the area where the figure stood, there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. "It's gone," Kane said. Carter was still at the window. No, it moved. The figure had shifted position, now standing closer, maybe 30 yards away. It hadn't walked. It had simply appeared in a new location, as if the space between the 2 points didn't exist. In the drone's camera view, it remained invisible. But through the window, in the bare sight of their eyes, it was there. "What are we dealing with?" Diaz asked, her voice tight. Harlow didn't answer. He was thinking about the briefing again, the missing information, the urgency. The Air Force knew something was in these mountains. They'd sent his team not just to find the climbers, but to confirm the presence of something else. Something they'd been tracking but couldn't prove. The figure moved again, now 20 yards away. This time they saw how it moved. One moment in one place, the next moment closer, with no transition between, like frames cut from a film. "It's not real," Nolan said. "It can't be." "It's real enough to leave tracks," Carter said, "and real enough to tear apart that campsite." The radio burst to life again, all channels simultaneously. The voice came through, loud and clear, no static this time. "Leave. Now, before it's too late." The transmission ended. In the silence that followed, they heard a new sound. Scratching. Long, slow scrapes against the outside wall of the station, moving from left to right, then back again. Something with claws. Something testing the structure. Harlow made his decision. "We're moving out. Load the vehicles. Essential gear only. We'll regroup at the secondary staging point and call for extraction." They moved fast, throwing equipment into the trucks. The scratching continued, circling the building now. Kane grabbed his laptop and the remaining drones. Diaz packed the medical supplies. Carter secured the radio equipment, still receiving that static pulse like a heartbeat. Nolan was the last one inside, checking the map coordinates for their exit route. As he rolled up the map, the scratching stopped. The silence was worse than the sound had been. "Captain, we're ready," he called out. No response. Nolan turned. Harlow was standing at the window, staring out. His posture was rigid, unnatural. When Nolan approached, he saw what Harlow was looking at. The figure was right outside the window, close enough to touch the glass. Its face, if it could be called that, was a dark void with 2 points of dim light where eyes should be. As they watched, it raised one hand and pressed it against the window. The glass frosted instantly, ice crystals spreading from where it touched. "Captain, we need to go," Nolan said. Harlow didn't move. His voice came out flat, emotionless. "It wants us to follow." "Follow what? Where?" "The tracks. It wants us to see what's at the end." Nolan grabbed Harlow's shoulder and pulled him back. The captain blinked, suddenly aware again, the strange trance broken. Outside, the figure was gone. But on the frosted window, where its hand had pressed, was a clear imprint. 5 fingers, but far too long, joints in wrong places. They ran for the vehicles. The convoy pulled out at 2100 hours, headlights cutting through the storm. The plan was to head back down the access road to the secondary staging point, 8 miles south. From there, they could use the satellite uplink to call for extraction. The road was barely visible under fresh snow, but drivable. They made it 3 miles before the lead truck's engine sputtered and died. Harlow tried to restart it. Nothing. The battery was dead. He checked the connections. Everything looked fine, but there was no power. Carter's truck pulled alongside, and he rolled down the window. "Ours just died, too," he shouted over the wind. Both vehicles, full batteries that morning, now completely drained. Kane checked his equipment. The laptop was dead. The radio batteries showed 0 charge. Even his flashlight wouldn't turn on, despite fresh batteries installed an hour ago. "Something's draining the power," Kane said. "Everything electronic is dead." Diaz looked back the way they'd come. Through the snow, barely visible in the darkness, she saw shapes moving along the tree line. Multiple figures, tall and dark, keeping pace with them. "We're not alone out here." The team gathered in the space between the trucks, weapons ready, forming a defensive circle. The shapes moved closer, surrounding them in a wide arc. There were at least 5 of them, maybe more. They moved with that same impossible motion, appearing and disappearing between the trees. Carter's radio, despite the dead battery, crackled to life one final time. The voice came through, multiple voices now, overlapping and echoing. "Find us. We're still here. Don't trust what you see. It's not what you think." Then the static roared back, louder than before, building to a shriek that made them all cover their ears. When it stopped, the shapes were gone. The tree line was empty, but there, in the fresh snow, all around their position, were tracks, dozens of them, circling the trucks in loops that overlapped and crossed. The prints were fresh, made within the last few minutes. Whatever had surrounded them had been close. Very close. "We hoof it from here," Harlow said. "Single file. Stay tight. If anyone sees anything, call it out immediately." They grabbed what they could carry and started walking. The snow was knee-deep, making every step exhausting. The wind had picked up again, driving the snow into their faces. Visibility was almost 0. They moved by compass, following the bearing that should take them back to the main road. After an hour, Nolan stopped. "Captain, these tracks." They'd been following what they thought was the road, but the ground showed prints. The same massive tracks they'd seen at the campsite. They were walking in something's footsteps, following a path it had already taken. "We turned around somehow," Carter said. "We're heading back toward the valley." Harlow checked his compass. The needle spun slowly, unable to find north. They were lost, following tracks that led them deeper into the mountains, away from safety. And somewhere in the darkness behind them, they heard footsteps. Multiple sets, heavy and slow, matching their pace. The voice came again, this time not from the radio, but from the darkness itself, echoing across the snow. "Don't follow the tracks." "But you already have." They ran. Coordination was abandoned as pure survival instinct took over. The team scattered into the trees, each person trying to find their own way out. The footsteps behind them multiplied, coming from all directions, always just out of sight, but close enough to hear. Harlow crashed through underbrush, branches tearing at his gear. He could hear the others calling out, their voices distant and distorted. He tried to respond, but his words came out as clouds of frozen breath that drifted away unheard. The forest had become a maze, every direction looking the same. He broke through into a small clearing and stopped. In the center, partially buried in snow, was a body. He approached carefully, weapon raised. It was Michael Ross, one of the missing climbers. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, face locked in an expression of absolute terror. But there were no wounds, no signs of injury. He looked like he'd simply stopped living, frozen mid-scream. Harlow keyed his radio out of habit, forgetting it was dead. But it crackled anyway, Carter's voice coming through broken and desperate. "Captain, they're not hunting us. They're herding us toward something." "Carter, where are you?" "I don't... The cave. We're going back to the cave." The transmission died. Harlow looked up and realized Carter was right. Through the trees ahead, he could see the cliff face, the dark mouth of the cave entrance. They'd been driven in a wide circle, pushed back to where they started. One by one, the team emerged from the forest into the clearing near the cave. All 5 of them, exhausted and terrified, drawn back to this place by routes they didn't choose. The footsteps in the forest had gone silent. The wind had stopped. Everything was waiting. Nolan spoke first, his voice barely a whisper. "We have to go inside. That's what it wants. That's where the climbers went." "That's where they died," Diaz said. "They're not all dead," Kane said, pointing. At the cave entrance, standing in the shadows just inside, were 2 figures. Human-sized, human-shaped. Sarah Bennett and Tom Fletcher. They stood perfectly still, faces expressionless, watching the team with eyes that reflected no light. Harlow called out to them. "Sarah? Tom? Can you hear me?" They didn't respond. They didn't move. They just stood there, waiting. Behind the team, the tall figures emerged from the forest, 5 of them now, forming a line blocking any retreat. The trap was complete. "We go forward, or we die here," Harlow said. "Those are our options." They moved toward the cave entrance, weapons raised, but knowing they were useless. Sarah and Tom stepped back into the darkness, beckoning them to follow. The team had no choice. They entered the cave, and this time the darkness was absolute. The darkness inside the cave was total and suffocating. Harlow's flashlight remained dead in his hand, useless weight. They moved by touch, hands on the walls, boots scraping against stone. The temperature dropped with every step deeper. Their breath came in ragged clouds that froze before dissipating. "Stay together," Harlow whispered, but his voice sounded wrong, muffled and distant, as if the cave itself absorbed the sound. They'd gone maybe 50 feet when Carter's light flickered on. Just for a second, long enough to show what was ahead. The tunnel opened into a massive chamber, far larger than any natural cave formation should be. The walls were smooth, almost polished, and covered in patterns that hurt to look at directly, geometric shapes that seemed to shift when viewed from the corner of the eye. In the center of the chamber stood Sarah Bennett and Tom Fletcher. Behind them, arranged in a circle, were others. At least 20 people, standing motionless, all wearing cold-weather gear from different eras. Some of the clothing looked decades old, others more recent. All of them had the same empty expression, the same dead eyes reflecting nothing. The light died again. In the darkness, Diaz grabbed Harlow's arm. "Captain, we need to leave. Now. Whatever this place is, it's not meant for us." "Where's Michael Ross?" Nolan asked. "If Sarah and Tom are here, why was Michael's body outside?" A sound echoed through the chamber, not footsteps. More like breathing, but massive. As if the cave itself was inhaling and exhaling. The air pressure changed, pressing against their eardrums. Then came the voice. Not from any single direction, but from everywhere at once. He resisted. The words resonated through the stone, through their bones. It wasn't the same voice they'd heard on the radio. This was older, deeper, something that had learned human speech but never truly understood it. "Who are you?" Harlow called out. "What do you want?" "We are the Watchers, the keepers of the threshold. You followed the tracks. You were meant to." Kane's equipment sparked to life suddenly. His laptop screen glowed, showing thermal imaging again, but the readings made no sense. The chamber they stood in was massive, extending hundreds of feet in all directions. The standing figures showed no heat signatures at all. They were the same temperature as the surrounding stone, dead, or something worse. But in the center of the chamber, there was heat, a massive concentration of thermal energy pulsing like a heartbeat. Something alive, something huge, occupying a space that shouldn't exist in this cave. "Show yourself," Harlow demanded, raising his weapon despite knowing it was futile. The breathing sound grew louder. The walls began to glow with a faint bioluminescence, revealing the true size of the chamber. It was enormous, a cathedral of stone carved by something that existed before human memory. And there, in the center, was the source. It defied description. Parts of it looked organic, others crystalline. Still others seemed to be made of shadow given form. It pulsed and shifted, never maintaining a single shape. The tall figures they'd seen outside were extensions of it, projections of its presence into their reality. This was something ancient, something that had been in these mountains since long before humans arrived. "You took those people," Carter said, his voice shaking. "You took the climbers. They wandered into our domain. They saw what should not be seen. Now they serve a greater purpose." Sarah Bennett turned her head, the movement jerky and unnatural. When she spoke, her voice was layered with that same deep resonance. "We are content. We understand now. The cold doesn't touch us anymore. Fear doesn't exist here." "Lies," Diaz said. "You're prisoners." "We are chosen," Tom Fletcher said, his voice equally hollow. "Soon you will be too." The tall figures moved into the chamber, surrounding the team. Their movements were fluid now, no longer stuttering between positions. In this place, they were real, solid, more present than anything else. Harlow felt it then, a pressure building in his mind. Thoughts that weren't his own, pushing against his consciousness. The entity was trying to reach into him, to make him understand, to make him accept. He could feel the offer, the promise of peace, the end of cold and fear and pain. All he had to do was stop fighting. "No," he said through gritted teeth. "We're leaving. All of us." "You cannot leave," the voice said. "You followed the tracks. The path only goes one way." Nolan was on his knees, hands pressed against his head. "It's inside my mind. I can feel it. It's showing me everything. All the people who came before, climbers, hikers, soldiers, they all ended up here. This is where the lost go." Kane's laptop was displaying footage now, but not from his drones. This was from cameras he'd never seen, military equipment from decades past. Grainy black and white footage showing teams of soldiers entering this same cave. The timestamp read 1962. The soldiers spread out, searching, then one by one they stopped moving. They simply stood still, weapons lowered, as something moved through the darkness around them. The footage jumped forward. More teams, more years. 1978, 1989, 2001, 2011. Every decade, someone found this place. Every time they were absorbed. The last footage showed a search and rescue team from 2017. 5 people who'd come looking for missing hikers and never returned. "How many?" Diaz whispered. "How many people has it taken?" "Enough," the voice said. "Enough to maintain the threshold. Enough to keep the deeper darkness contained." Harlow understood then. This entity wasn't the threat. It was the guardian. Something worse lay deeper in the mountains. Something that required constant vigilance, constant sacrifice. The people it took weren't victims. They were fuel for a barrier that kept something far more terrible from breaking through. "There has to be another way," Harlow said. "There is not. The threshold hungers. Without sustenance, it weakens. What lies beyond would consume not just these mountains, but everything. Your world, your people, all would fall into the cold dark." The pressure in Harlow's mind increased. He could see it now, visions of what lay beyond. an emptiness that made the void of space look warm and welcoming, a hunger that had existed since before stars formed. The entity in this cave was ancient, but what it held back was eternal. Carter pulled his sidearm, pressing it against his own temple. I won't be used. I won't become one of those things. Carter, don't, Harlow started, but the sergeant's finger was already tightening on the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the chamber like thunder. But Carter was still standing. The gun hadn't fired. He pulled the trigger again and again, but the mechanism wouldn't work. Nothing worked here. The entity controlled everything. Resistance is temporary, the voice said. Acceptance is inevitable. The tall figures moved closer. Sarah and Tom stepped forward, reaching out with pale hands. Behind them, the other absorbed people advanced in a slow tide. The team had nowhere to go. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and weaponless against something that existed beyond physical threat. Then Nolan stood up. His eyes were clear, focused. Captain, the radio. Carter, give me the radio. It's dead, Carter said. Everything's dead. No, it's still receiving. It never stopped receiving. That's how it's been communicating with us, through our own equipment. Nolan grabbed the radio from Carter's pack. The screen was dark, but he could feel a faint vibration, the same pulse they'd heard in the static. He adjusted the frequency dial, pushing it to maximum range, far beyond normal civilian or military bands. What are you doing? Harlow asked. If it can transmit through our equipment, maybe we can transmit through it. Maybe someone else is listening. The static returned, filling the chamber with white noise. Nolan keyed the mic and spoke clearly, calmly, directly into whatever was listening. This is Lieutenant Eric Nolan, United States Air Force. Coordinates 39.7 degrees north, 105.6 degrees west. We've located the threshold, requesting immediate intervention. Authorization code Omega 7 Black. Silence. Then, through the static, a response. Not from the entity, from somewhere else, somewhere far away and yet instantly present. Authorization confirmed. Intervention approved. Clear the area. The entity's voice changed, losing its calm certainty. What have you done? What you can't, Nolan said. Called for help. The chamber began to shake. Dust and ice fell from the ceiling. The bioluminescent glow flickered and dimmed. The tall figures froze in place, their forms becoming unstable, flickering like bad television reception. Sarah and Tom's faces contorted in confusion and pain as something was ripped away from them. A new sound filled the cave. High-pitched, mechanical, building in intensity. Through cracks forming in the ceiling, light poured in, not daylight. This was artificial, searingly bright, turning the darkness into noon. Above them, something massive descended. Aircraft, military, configurations that Harlow had never seen before, technology that shouldn't exist. They positioned themselves above the cave, and from them came a sound that made the entity scream, a frequency beyond human hearing, but felt in every bone, every tooth. A weapon designed specifically for something like this. The entity recoiled, its form collapsing inward. The people it had absorbed fell to the ground, suddenly released. Sarah and Tom gasped, their eyes clearing, becoming human again. The others began to wake as well, confused and terrified, but alive. Truly alive. "Move!" Harlow shouted. "Everyone out!" They ran through the collapsing chamber, pulling the freed captives with them. The cave walls were crumbling, entire sections falling away to reveal the dawn sky above. The entity was being forced deeper, pushed back into whatever realm it had come from by technology that existed in defiance of natural law. They emerged into morning light. The storm had passed. The sky was clear and blue. Behind them, the cliff face collapsed entirely, sealing the cave with tons of rock. The aircraft hung in the air for a moment longer, then vanished. Not flying away, simply gone, as if they'd never been there. The team stood in the snow, breathing hard, surrounded by 20 dazed people who'd been missing for days, months, years. Some didn't even know what year it was. Michael Ross approached slowly, his face showing recognition and confusion in equal measure. "We were somewhere else," he said quietly. "Somewhere cold. And now we're back." Harlow's radio crackled. His real radio, standard military issue, functioning normally. A familiar voice came through. "Recovery team, this is Buckley Command. Transport is inbound to your location. Medical team standing by. Good work, Captain." It was the colonel from the original briefing, but his tone had changed. There was no surprise in his voice, no shock. He'd known what they would find. He'd sent them specifically to trigger this response. "Sir, what just happened?" Harlow asked. "What were those aircraft?" "Classified above your clearance, Captain. Your mission was to confirm the threshold's location and status. You've done that. The rest is handled by other departments." "And the entity? Is it gone?" A pause. "Contained. For now. These things tend to return eventually. That's why we keep watching." The colonel signed off. Within an hour, 3 heavy-lift helicopters arrived, carrying medical personnel and what looked like scientists. They evacuated everyone quickly, efficiently, asking no questions. The freed captives were sedated and loaded onto separate transports. The team was separated, each taken to different aircraft. As Harlow's helicopter lifted off, he looked back at the valley one final time. The cliff face was gone, replaced by a massive scar in the mountain. But there, in the fresh snow around the collapse site, he saw tracks. The same massive prints, leading away from the rubble, heading deeper into the mountains. Whatever had been contained wasn't destroyed. It was just elsewhere now, waiting. 3 weeks later, Harlow sat in a secure facility in Colorado Springs. The debriefing had lasted days. Each team member questioned separately, their stories compared and analyzed. They'd been told the mission was classified at the highest level. Non-disclosure agreements were signed, backed by threats that made it clear silence wasn't optional. The freed captives were recovering in a medical facility whose location Harlow wasn't given. He'd heard Sarah Bennett had no memory of her time in the cave. Tom Fletcher remembered everything and wouldn't stop screaming for the first 72 hours. Michael Ross had been found dead in his secured room, cause of death listed as heart failure. But Harlow knew better. Some part of what had touched him remained. Carter, Diaz, and Kane had all been reassigned to different bases, different units. Nolan was simply gone. When Harlow asked about him, he was told the lieutenant had been transferred to a special projects division. No further information available. On his last day at the facility, the colonel visited him personally. He placed a small box on the table between them. "Open it," he said. Inside was a medal Harlow didn't recognize. The design showed a mountain peak surrounded by stars, with a single eye in the center. "The Order of the Threshold," the colonel explained, "awarded to those who've encountered what guards the boundaries. You're one of 47 people alive who've seen what you saw and lived to walk away." "What was it?" Harlow asked. "Really? We don't know. It's been there longer than recorded history. Native tribes spoke of places in the mountains where the lost gather. Early explorers reported similar encounters. In 1952, we established formal monitoring. You're the 7th team we've sent in when the threshold weakened." "And the aircraft?" "The technology that forced it back." The colonel smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's the interesting part, Captain. Those aircraft don't exist yet. Every time someone triggers the protocol you activated, they appear from approximately 30 years in the future. We don't build them. We don't operate them. They simply arrive, do their job, and return to whenever they came from." Harlow felt cold despite the heated room. "That's impossible. So is a cave that absorbs people and holds back the void. So are entities that exist in multiple places simultaneously. Impossible is a word we stopped using decades ago. We just document and contain now. The colonel stood to leave, then paused at the door. The tracks you saw leading away from the collapse? We found where they ended. Another cave system, 40 miles north. We've sealed it, posted guards, established a monitoring station. But eventually, someone will wander too close. Someone will follow the tracks. And when they do, we'll send another team. Why not just destroy it completely? Because it's not the enemy, Captain. It's the lock. And you really don't want to see what happens if that lock breaks permanently. After the colonel left, Harlow sat alone with the metal. He thought about the people still standing in that chamber. The ones who'd been there so long, they'd forgotten they were human. He thought about the tracks in the snow, always leading somewhere, always waiting for the next person to follow. That night, he received a message on his personal phone, unknown number, a single sentence. "Thank you for maintaining the threshold." Lieutenant Nolan. Harlow tried to reply, but the message wouldn't send. The number didn't exist, but somehow he knew Nolan was out there, part of whatever program operated those impossible aircraft, watching the mountains for the next time the darkness grew too strong. 3 months after his return, Harlow was hiking alone in the Rockies, trying to process everything that had happened. The trail was familiar, well-marked, safe. He stopped at a vista point to rest and check his map. That's when he saw them. Tracks in the snow beside the trail, fresh, deep, unmistakable. The same massive prints he'd followed in that valley. They paralleled the trail for maybe 20 feet, then cut directly into the forest, heading toward a ridge he'd never explored. Harlow stood there for a long time, staring at those tracks. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to go back down the mountain, to call it in, but he also remembered Nolan's words in that chamber. Some of us are meant to watch. Some of us are meant to guard. He adjusted his pack and started following the tracks, not because he was curious, not because he was brave, but because someone had to. Because the threshold didn't maintain itself, because every generation needed its watchers, its keepers, its volunteers who would walk into the dark so others could stay in the light. The tracks led deeper into the mountains. Behind him, his radio crackled softly. Through the static came that familiar voice, calm and eternal. "Welcome back, Captain. The threshold awaits." Harlow didn't respond. He just kept walking, following the tracks into the wilderness, knowing he might never come back, knowing that some missions never truly end. They just wait for the next person willing to take the first step. The mountains kept their secrets. The threshold remained. And somewhere in the snow, the tracks continued, patient and persistent, waiting for the next follower. Don't turn off the light now. If this story left you cold, subscribe to Battleground Stories for more encounters from the edge of reality. The next nightmare is already waiting on your screen.